Welcome to another candidate interview. My name is Shakeel Dalal. I'm a columnist and contributor for the Longmont Observer. I'm here today with Marta Loachamin, who is running for the District 2 seat for the Boulder County Board of Commissioners in 2020. Marta, thank you for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
Can you tell us a little bit about yourself? How long have you lived in Longmont?
Sure. I have been, in and out of Boulder County since 1992. The first house I bought for my family was in 1998 here in Longmont.
And what do you do for a living?
My career is residential real estate. I sell property. 85 to 90% of my clients are monolingual Spanish speakers and or bilingual families. And I also do a lot of consulting work and have taught for the St. Vrain Valley School District. So have had a few different careers in my life so far.
So you're running for the Boulder County Board of Commissioners. Many of our watchers might not even know what the Board of Commissioners does. What are the responsibilities of the board?
That's the number one question that I get, which is very interesting. The county commissioners, truly, you're right, it's a board of 3 people. So we have a city manager. We don't do that for the county. Instead, we have 3 people who represent 3 different districts, the way that our county is broken up. And the county commissioners really oversee, administer, govern, and lead on our $400 million budget. That is everything taxpayers pay and touches everything from open space transportation to housing services, human services, etc.
So would you say that the Board of Commissioners essentially operates as county-level government that sits above the city-level governments, for example, in the cities of Longmont and Boulder?
Right.
Okay. Why do you think this is the right time for you to be running for the board?
So I think there's a few different pieces. The timing there's the personal level, there's the, my career level, there's the community need level. For me, really, this position is another step in where I've been in my life and what my expertise, my background, my career, my volunteerism, my work in other boards and commissions around the state of Colorado and also national work that I've done. So it feels like a very next step of leadership. From a county perspective. For me, because I'm so connected to Longmont, District 2 is very personal for me. From a county level, because I've done county work, I'm very interested in what happens for our community at a county level, and then who knows what's next after that. But I feel like county work is very important before I would go on to another step of leadership at a higher level.
If you were elected, what would you hope to accomplish during your term on the board?
Yeah, that's a great question. Thank you. Really my focus, just based on my background and the work that I've already been involved in and continue to do, is around economic opportunity, healthy community, and sustainable housing.
So, reading your materials, one of the activities you've really prominently focused on is a program called Resiliency for All. Can you tell us a little bit about Resiliency for All and what your role was?
Yeah, the Resiliencia para Todos is the name of the project, which is Resiliency for All. I was hired as basically as a coordinator as a flood recovery specialist to work for the city of Longmont. It was a Division of Local Affairs DOLA grant from the state to address what happened after 2013 Colorado flood. And the state was looking to find out specifically what happened to our vulnerable populations. And that was a big question for the whole state because there were so many counties that were affected by that flood. So specifically for us in Longmont, we were taking a look at, from the city of Longmont, which actually was county work. And so we were out in the county having conversations with monolingual Spanish speakers and everybody, all the agencies, all the partnerships of community agencies that really are involved with our Spanish-speaking population. The question was, where are the barriers that exist for that sector of our population when it comes to accessing resource, information, help, assistance from government and also other institutions.
Did the flood affect different parts of Longmont differently? So did it have a different effect on the Spanish-speaking population in Longmont versus the rest of the city?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's, the state realized that a few years after the flood and really wanted to identify where those barriers to access are. And so, yes, absolutely.
What were some of the differences in those impacts between the different communities in the city?
Sure. I mean, a really simple example was just the basic communication, meaning when the flood happened, there was no Spanish language messaging happening at that time. And so the supervisor of the project, Carmen Ramirez, was there because she's the City of Longmont government employee. And so she was there when they said, hey, is anything going out in Spanish? She, as a community member and as a person working for the city, just happened to be in the right place at the right time.
She's bilingual?
She's bilingual. Okay. And so they shifted it to her, like happens with a lot of us as cultural brokers, and said, you tell them where to go. So that's a gap in communication. But then there was also the issue of, let's say I live over by Mountain View and Hover. And so we had like Champion Greens, a lot of those folks had access right away to call a hotel, get online with FEMA. They already had an idea based on their experience, their network, their lifestyle. And what we found is a lot of our Spanish-speaking community, much later, were just getting information, getting access, finding out. During that work, which actually was 4 years after the flood, we were able to connect a family, Spanish-speaking family, to the resources. They'd been waiting that long.
So a Spanish-speaking family waited 4 years to receive...
to get reimbursements for what had happened to their property in the flood.
So since the project was 4 years later on, did you see a difference in how the Spanish-speaking part of Longmont recovered from the flood versus the English-speaking part of Longmont?
Oh yeah, absolutely. In a lot of different ways. We've talked about, there's some of the pieces of people that have been truly displaced all around the state of Colorado, but in our county, who won't ever return back to their homes. And that's for a lot of different groups of people in our community. What we were really trying to assess in that project was, one, what were the access to barriers, but we also gave community an opportunity to sit down with us and guide the conversation about what are the recommendations so that we're in a better place next time we have a natural disaster, because it's not if, it's when.
So the lessons from that program, do you think there's a way to translate those to the county level as well?
Yeah, and that is really, amongst a few other things in my life, that was part of this decision to run for Board of County Commissioners, because that was a data assessment, and there's a lot of data assessments done around the county, around the state. The issue is there were no implementation funds, and so we have these great community-based recommendations. So how can I now implement that? Use that voice, use those stories, use those experiences to change the frame of leadership and the conversations that happen at a county level. Absolutely.
What are a couple of specific examples of things that you would like to implement on the Board of County Commissioners that you learned from the Resiliency for All program?
Specifically from the resiliency work, because there's others, of course, but specific to that work, one of the pieces that was brought up from our bilingual youth around the county was, how do we elevate their voice? Because they're truly, in case after case, they're translating for agencies in different sectors around our county right now, everything from finance, from buying mobile homes, from stories from kids in our community, to translating for medical issues in some of our local medical facilities, to taking care of their registration for high school and for colleges as the dominant English speaker in their household. Mm-hmm. So how do we, and then when we have people who are trying to get support and or resource from our different partnerships around the county, that communication barrier still exists in Boulder County in 2018.
I was watching the video that the City of Longmont released about the Resiliency for All program, and in that video there's an interview with a middle school student who describes the barriers that her family faces interacting with sort of government on all sorts of levels. And there's a moment in the video where she describes her and her friends and her neighbors being afraid to contact the authorities for risk of perhaps alerting the federal government that there may be illegal aliens living in a particular household, or in other ways attracting unwanted attention that might create difficulties for the family. Do you think that that's an issue that can also be addressed on the county level?
Yeah, let me just, in a friendly way, just say we consider that sector of our community undocumented. That's how we refer to that sector of our community. And yes, so there's a couple different pieces. I've had the privilege to sit down with Sheriff Pelley and have that conversation about what are we really doing, not just today, but that I oversaw that video, I wrote the report and created those training materials. It was really important to me to include what had just happened for us and as from a country and a national perspective, meaning in 2017, things shifted significantly for all of us as part of the immigrant community. From a fear, from a discrimination, from higher levels of racism. Myself, my kid and I have been victims of hate crimes here in Boulder County since 2017 and that election. And so that was really important. So what you saw in that video is a very real, one example and one story of when we're in natural disasters, people are afraid to answer their door based on everything else that is going on. And during that study and during that work, we had a situation up in Sunshine Canyon wildfire. Mm-hmm. And there were people who did not answer their doors.
This also dovetails into the impending 2020 census. The Trump administration is in the process and going through the courts on an added question to the census to inquire about the citizenship status of people who are answering the census. Part of an effort that's being undertaken by progressive groups across the country is educational work and coming up with ways not only to fight this question being added to the census, but also to ensure that people responding to the census understand that this information can't be used against them in an immigration proceeding. Is there something that you believe that the county of Boulder, if you were elected as a commissioner, could be doing to amplify those efforts on a governmental level rather than just on an activist level?
So there's a couple pieces with the 2020 census. This election will happen for me in November 2020. So I wouldn't go into office until January 2021. So just to address that, right, that piece would be done. Meanwhile, are we doing work to spread that out? Yes, and have people involved from a community level, the same way that we always do. And we always show up and we're always part of that conversation, talking about the community who's asked to jump in for all these different efforts. After that, I mean, there's a few things that I'm hoping will be totally shifted from a national level and hopefully from a local level in 2020 that will really allow community voice. And so that's part of all the way back to your question about timing. So imperative for me as somebody who's connected already with community needs and who's been doing a lot of that type of work already to have a voice at that table so that we can be in a place to shift those conversations after that.
So let's switch topics to affordable housing.
Absolutely.
Rent and home prices in Boulder County have risen much faster than wages. As a Boulder County Commissioner, what actions would you like to see taken in order to address this problem as it both exists now and into the future as that problem foreseeably gets worse?
Yeah, it's such a big question. I've been invited and worked on housing and health task forces and committees around the county for years and years. In general, the conversation always comes to how can we build more affordable housing? And really, Shakeel, for me, I feel like I have a completely different skill set in regards to other ways to address housing, because it's not just affordable housing, it's workforce housing, it's transitional housing. There's all these different pieces. My work has been around sustainable homeownership. That's the ultimate goal for people who want and are ready to do that. But I feel like there's a lack of education. We have some amazing programs here in Boulder County. I have hundreds of success stories with families who have gone through all those steps to do that. But I believe strongly that we aren't informing our community to be prepared to really address, when you talk about rent, this burden of house payment, whether it's rent or whether it's your housing payment. And the sad story is that after being in the housing industry, I was in the housing industry when the market collapsed. I was laid off. I've seen all sides of it. And I feel like we've done ourselves a disservice from a community level of not being involved in financial literacy. Since people talk about 2008, it really was 2006 in Colorado and then spread out around the country when the mortgage crisis happened. But just even from that standpoint, over the last 11 years, as a community, we haven't done a great job in preparing folks to be able to rent, to go into these next steps of homeownership, whether it's deed restricted or typical housing.
You mentioned the term sustainable housing. Can you explain what that means?
Sure. I mean, the piece of sustainability, right, is that we want it to be able to happen. So my task from, career standpoint, my task is to help a family get into a property where they're going to be able to stay. So it's not a transaction. It's not, let me get you to the bank and just max you out, and then we're going to find you that house that puts you over that 50% of your income or that 41% or whatever it is for your loan pieces. As much as really having these conversations, for example, Colorado Housing Finance Authority and some of our Boulder County programs that will really sit down with people and work on budgets and planning so that sustainably they can stay in that home and really understand what that vehicle is for investment, for equity, for financial planning, for cases of emergency. Now I've got somewhere to basically pull from if I needed to. So that's sustainable means we want to keep our families in their homes, and the goal is too that we want to have owner-occupied properties. Having a bunch of investment properties does not help our community grow.
You mentioned a common criticism of realtors, that often there's a perception that a realtor's goal is to find the maximum priced home that you can afford and then convince you to buy that home because it maximizes the realtor's commission. Do you think that we should change some facets of the incentive structure that's created for realtors?
Not necessarily. I think the piece and the reason why is because to be a realtor, which I think is such a misnomer, it's a license that we have. It's basically like being an attorney, except it's a limited license use of law, just to practice real estate. So there's a significant amount of liability that's included in that, and the facilitation of what that transaction is from a legal standpoint. The piece that I think the misnomers and the stigma comes from is that are people really supporting that whole transaction? And from my standpoint and my career, it's really about developing a relationship, but also educating. And we have some great resources here in Boulder County. And again, I just don't feel like they're shared out enough. They're not utilized enough. There's a lot of programs that some agents and some lenders don't use because it doesn't provide the same type of economic gain per se. And that's a problem. That's a problem for our community when they really want to have all of the options.
Do you think being on the Board of Commissioners will allow you to better publicize and perhaps amplify the voice of those programs?
Yeah, absolutely, because it's all connected is in the resources and the partnerships that the county uses. And so that's one little fragment of what that Housing and Human Services Department does that the county commissioners oversee.
You also mentioned financial literacy from the perspective of home buyers. For a home buyer, do you think it makes sense, for example, for educational programs to be created so that they can better understand the terms of financing and understand what they're getting into when they purchase a home?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the pieces that in my nonprofit work and being on other boards and committees is with the National Association of Hispanic Real Estate Professionals. I've been part of that executive leadership for several years and do a lot of work outside in community. When I worked in the district, I created some professional development that our St. Vrain Valley school districts have available to them as teachers to continue that financial literacy conversation in classrooms, because it's something that should be a much more day-to-day conversation. So yes, and I think that there's a few ways that could be translated into a county commissioner role, meaning how do we, overseeing 2,000 Boulder County employees, how can I help interweave that conversation to really support county employees? Because part of that job in the county commissioner role is also administration. So how do we support employees? How do we make Boulder County a fantastic place to live and work and be and have these career paths? And that's part of financial literacy too.
If anyone wanted to find out more about your candidacy, where could they go?
So yeah, the website is Marta, it's MARTA 2020.org. And that's the website, that's the most information as far as that's what gets updated. And otherwise it's info@marta2020.org.
Marta Loachamin, thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you.